But really, the State of AI in Gaming report, I think, is what we'd call the flagship project of the initiative. It really kind of provides this tangible thing that the industry can go to, kind of a benchmark for the industry around what's going on in AI. And for all stakeholders, for industry, regulators, academics, researchers, journalists, I think there's something in there for everyone.
The topic of this conversation and interview is the state of AI in gaming in 2026, because you published a report in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, so last May, actually, so May 2025, we launched AirHub, which is the AI research hub right here at UNLV International Gaming Institute. So AirHub is basically a research lab dedicated to exploring, studying the impacts of AI for our sector. And we really wanted the lab to become kind of the definitive go-to resource for anything AI in gaming. So we've got, various projects and initiatives to achieve that objective. And yeah, we did our first iteration of this report in April. We're planning to do it on an annualized basis. So we're actually just started to gear up to prepare for the 2027 edition already. So yeah, it's exciting. I'm happy to dig into it today with you a bit.
Yeah, so to give it some context, going back before the report, and the report published in April, and things are moving so quick. So there's probably some things that still resonate today, but there's probably some things that have shifted dramatically, even since publication.
Yeah.
We'll dive into that. But for context, give us kind of the evolution for you, how doing your PhD, how you landed at this report.
Yeah. So I've always kind of been into data science and analytics, whether, when I started grad school back in the early 2000s, I also was an analyst for some of the, integrated resorts here in Vegas. So I'd done kind of more traditional data science, predictive analytics. When I went back to do my PhD, I got more into machine learning, so learning about supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning. As we just talked about, applied that to a data set we had, a payments data set. But then after my PhD, actually, I got interested in kind of how to do machine learning according to best practices, because there's lots of different ways you can, not different ways, but it's important to be transparent about methods, let's put it that way. And I was interested to look at what was called AI ethics. It's more called like AI governance, responsible AI now. So kind of got into this area of best practices around machine learning and AI, what governance procedures need to be in place, what transparency mechanisms need to be in place, and started exploring this, late 2021, early 2022, started to conceptualize a study where I wanted to interview lots of different stakeholders about their AI and machine learning practices. Then, ChatGPT got released in late 2022. So that was really good timing. So, we kind of made sure we were reframing the study a bit to account for this, explosion in generative AI. And yeah, that was really good timing because, obviously the release of ChatGPT got everyone talking way more about AI and what the impacts might be for society and business. So I was lucky enough to have this piece of research out around, AI ethics and gambling. So got to talk at some conferences and things. And, that kind of snowballed. I met a really good friend and colleague of mine now, Sima Dragicevic, and me and him started talking. We had very similar interests, and we both kind of conceptualized this idea of having this AI research hub, and we thought that would be a great benefit for the industry because I don't think there was pockets of AI research going on at different academic institutions, but no kind of one center of excellence for that. So I think that's a real true objective with the hub. So yeah, just kind of snowballed and met people, right timing kind of things, and it all kind of fell into place.
Kaz, what do you think AI and gaming means? I think if someone's just new to it all, it might mean different things to different people. For example, if we say AI, say in pathology or reading X-rays, right, or an MRI, we kind of know what that is.
Yeah.
In regard to that application.
Yeah.
How would you say or describe what does AI in gaming mean?
Yeah, that's a really important question, right? And I think it's important for us nowadays to really define what we're talking about when it comes to AI. I think less so now, but like, a lot of the time, I remember last year, you'd say AI and people just were like, oh, that's ChatGPT, that chat interface, that's AI, and that's it. But, there's lots of, AI is a very broad term, and then there's lots of different things that fall under that term AI. There's generative AI, there's reinforcement learning, there's traditional machine learning, there's supervised learning, unsupervised learning, chatbots, like lots of things would fall under this umbrella term that is AI. So you're right. So, there's sometimes you read about clear-cut use cases or applications of the technology, and it's pretty clear what's being done. Gaming's a very diverse industry, right? We have operators that span, physical environments and digital environments. We have the supporting companies like the technology providers, the slot manufacturers. We have the massive third-party vendor system that provide all kinds of technology and solutions. And I think AI, in some form or another, is touching each of these touch points right across the industry. So it's to your point, it's maybe hard to give a one-sentence definition for what AI in gaming is. There's just a varied amount of use cases, and this is something we wanted to touch on in the report actually. So it's one of the first things we asked was we had I think we surveyed over 80 companies, 83 companies in total. So we asked them, how are you using AI? Where are you using it? And we found that most activity is actually centered around what we'd call more back of house, so like technology and security and product innovation. We did see, significant activity also in things like customer-facing functions, business operations, risk and compliance, but definitely the bulk of activity appears to be more technology and security, product innovation at the moment. So that could be, using AI to help with cybersecurity efforts. On the product innovation side, game studios using it to really amplify and accelerate game development. My colleague Dan, he runs the game innovation lab here, and he says with AI now that they're developing games in one class, which used to take them one semester. So yeah, those are that's kind of my answer to that question, I guess. Yeah.
You mentioned security, and just to be clear, for the purpose of this interview, facial recognition is being used, I guess, in Asia, right? Is security, but to be clear about how it's approached in North or the Americas.
Yeah, I think I'm actually I don't really have a good pulse in terms of where precisely it's being used. I know I saw on the show floor last year, or it might have been 2 years ago, Konami has a technology where they've got cameras in a slot machine. And I think they've got that rolled out in places where the camera in the slot machine actually replaces the need for a physical player's card, right? Because it just does facial recognition. It's kind of like unlocking your phone, right? You can just swipe in with the facial recognition. So yeah, I think it's a good use case. As you said, there's going to be important privacy concerns there, right? And that's going to be more important or less important based on which jurisdictions you're at. I think, some countries that maybe have really good data privacy protocols in place, and there's kind of this better trust amongst the consumers that could vary by various jurisdictions. But certainly, whenever you collect biometric information, I think there needs to be a bit more scrutiny and a few more guardrails and safeguards in place if you're applying that kind of data to your AI systems. And it's something actually we're working at AirHub is providing the industry with these open source governance tools so we can help the industry kind of adopt the technology faster. Because if you can demonstrate that you're adopting it responsibly and putting the proper guardrails in place, I think that's going to be a nice proactive step for the industry in terms of gaining trust and being able to deploy the technology without fear that, you know, you're going to get scrutinized by a regulator or something. Maybe you've got, you know, you put your best foot forward and you're showing all of the governance and safeguards you're putting in place.
With the report, what do you think gaming is getting right now? So maybe they weren't even getting it right when you were writing the report, but some findings that you feel right now gaming is really getting right in regard to AI?
It's a really good question. I haven't been asked that question yet. Let me see. You know, I think one of the findings out the report was a hesitancy or perhaps a lag when we benchmarked against other sectors like healthcare and finance, that the industry hadn't adopted agentic or autonomous systems as quickly as we see it being adopted in other industries. You could say that's a failure. That would be a harsh way to describe it. But you could also look at it as good business practice, because, you know, we are a heavily regulated, scrutinized industry. So perhaps it is good to, you know, play it safe and, you know, not adopt it so quickly. Because, you know, the stakes are higher in gaming a lot of the time. If you had an autonomous agent that interfaces with your customers, you want to make sure that it's only doing what it's supposed to. It's not going to start maybe, I don't know, giving betting advice or giving counseling for problem gamblers, right? You don't want it to go off the rails. So I think, yeah, to your point about getting things right, maybe that's a bad thing, but maybe it's a good thing as well. Maybe it's showing that the industry is demonstrating caution, which might be a good thing. Other things, yeah, I don't know. I've started to see kind of a lot of companies roll out more use cases, you know, like betting assistance, enterprise deployed, you know, proprietary chatbot system like models. So I think we're starting to gain traction. I think next year's report is going to be enlightening in terms of the pace of change. Let's put it that way.
You said that, in fact, maybe the slow adoption of AI might be one thing that gaming is doing right.
Yeah.
So how would you define, what does adoption of AI mean for an operator?
That's a good question as well. There's various things, right? Let's take a land-based operator, just to like constrain the context a little bit. To really leverage, I think, what we know to be maybe the powerful use cases, I think you really need to start with infrastructure. And maybe even before that, it's your data, right? And this is hard for land-based operators, arguably, because they've got so many different data systems. You know, there's lots of different businesses within the business. There's the casino business, but, you know, the customers also go to the restaurants and the retail outlets. So there's a lot of disparate data systems out there. So first thing is getting that all in check. Can those systems all talk to each other? Are all the relations in place? Because only then can you really leverage putting an AI system on top of that, right? If you want to get a full view of your customer, like, and you want AI to help you with that, you're going to need your data in a proper place. So I think before we even talk about adoption and the use cases, I think it's that kind of foundational layer that needs to happen to facilitate the adoption. Then I think as well, it's about expertise and strategy. I think, you know, we found in our report that a lot of the companies that had at least a strategy in place that was helping guide their initiatives. They seem to be a bit further along, which makes sense. You know, they've started to think about it and they put a strategy in place. We also saw that, you know, companies who have hired AI leadership, like a chief AI officer, responsible AI personnel, have hiring planned or have dedicated AI staff. Those companies as well seem to maybe have the potential to adopt the technology and get ROI faster.
So you said it starts with having the data.
Yeah.
In some cases, for operators, maybe their data isn't organized in a way that's ready for AI.
Yeah. I think so. And it depends on the use case, right? And it depends what you want to start doing with it. For decades now, I'm sure you've heard about it. Like, there's been this promise of the 360 customer view, and that hasn't really materialized, I don't think. I think a lot would argue that we're still not there yet. And it's to do with like legacy systems, I guess. And I haven't worked in a property for a long time, but I remember when I was at one, even the hotel systems, right? I think we had like 3 different hotel systems, and to get those to talk to one another was quite a lift. And that was 3 systems for the same function. And then, layer on top of that, like, I want to know, people who have booked this hotel, like, they then want to look at what their gaming was like when they visited the property. That seems something very simple, but at least I'm not sure how many properties have that kind of what seems basic, linkage. How many properties have that in place? I don't know.
When saying adoption might be one thing that gaming is doing right, could that also say that it might be one thing gaming is doing wrong if you have a low adoption rate?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing like one industry I follow quite closely is financial services, purely because they're investing so much money in the technology, and they've got a belief that it's going to give them the return on investment. They're investing millions, if not billions, in AI to accelerate their business. JP Morgan, for example, I think their AI department has close to 1,000 people, and they're all dedicated to AI research and AI development. Like they do their own AI research, they're developing their own models, because they see it as a competitive advantage. We don't see that in gaming. I haven't seen one company really adopt, AI like I just described JP Morgan has done. I'm not aware of a company that has like a AI department. I'm not aware of a company that's developing their own models, doing their own AI research. So perhaps that's an opportunity. These casinos, these online operators, they have the data. That's what you need to develop your proprietary models. And then, if you can do your own research, develop your own proprietary IP and models, maybe you give yourself a decent competitive advantage and you can really, kind of slay the competitors.
Yeah, and it makes one ask, what is the ideal outcome? Of course, the operator initially might say to increase profits, but isn't it really maybe the better guest experience?
Yeah.
Well, what is the ideal, in your view, what is the ideal outcome?
Yeah, I think your last point there, like, I think it's important, very much so for like land-based and even online, you would say as well. We got to remember this is an entertainment product, right? And the job is to provide the optimal or best, whatever you want to call it, experience for that customer. Yeah, you want to make money and you want to have cost savings, and those 2 things were perhaps the most important motivations for adopting AI when we surveyed the industry. Delivering customer experiences was up there as well, and I think it's important to keep that top of mind. That yeah, we're in hospitality, entertainment business that is about the customer at the end of the day. So I think, adopting AI in a way that doesn't damage that experience, I think is going to be important. Very much so for land-based, right? I think this gets into kind of, how much do you want to remove humans from certain processes? Like, can you deliver a best-in-class, I don't know, front desk check-in experience without a human there? Like, I think it kind of speaks to that relationship between how much do you want to keep the humans there versus how much do you want AI doing?
Yeah, I had the experience recently in Tokyo, Yokohama, actually, where I checked into a hotel, and the person was on the computer screen with no human present. But there was a point where a human came out from the back,
Right.
and I forgot what it was, something to do with the passport or something. But the interaction, for the most part, was a person. And I must say that I kind of wanted that person there.
Yeah, I was just in Europe last month. We go to Europe every summer. We stay with my parents. But the high street used to be in England a very kind of, you go there, there's lots of shops, and you go shopping. There's a shopping centre. All the big brands are there, or whatever. I just really noticed how much technology had changed that experience. I remember being in a few shops and I literally couldn't find a person. It was impossible, to find anyone to talk to help you. And at least for me, that kind of ruins the experience. And I might as well just go online shopping at home, or go to the physical shop. But I'm getting on in age now, so maybe I'm just complaining.
Yeah, I think there's some magic that happens with these little micro interactions if they're pleasant, whether it's ordering a coffee or checking in at a hotel or what have you. Can you kind of give an overview of what your research addressed in regard to marketing and AI?
Yeah, we didn't cover much there. I think what we did find was that, as I said before, the use case kind of activity around customer-facing functions, marketing, CRM, appeared to be a little bit less so than those back-of-house use cases I mentioned, like cybersecurity, product innovation, which was a bit surprising, but also not. As I said, I think maybe the stakes are a bit higher. You don't want AI systems going wrong if it's interacting with your customers. So I think in terms of the hierarchy of risk of AI use cases, right? If it's not touching the customer at all, maybe you can be a bit faster and a bit more nimble. When things start to touch the customer, maybe there's some due diligence involved, and there's a level of caution required. In terms of the specific use cases and how people are leveraging AI for those marketing functions, I think, a lot of it is the stuff that's been around for decades, like predictive analytics on your CRM database. So I think that wasn't necessarily anything new. It's probably just kind of getting amplified by AI because, people are using coding agents now so they can do things faster and quicker. We hear about, essentially you can have AIs now act as if it's 10 casino hosts. So, rather than just one casino host, you have an AI and it can basically handle a lot of the things maybe 10 casino hosts would do. So yeah, I think we're still maybe going to see more of that as the governance mechanisms and the industry catches up in terms of use cases. I think we've just scratched the surface in terms of what's possible in terms of AI marketing and gaming.
We opened this up and you mentioned the low adoption rate for gaming is an industry for AI. What would you pinpoint? Why is it? Why is it a low adoption rate? If you or even to speak outside the report itself. Why do you think?
I think I've spoken about a few of the things already. And like there's a continuum, right? I think like there's some companies we found that are ahead of the curve for sure. But generally, I think we're in this kind of developing stage. We constructed this thing we called the AI Maturity Index. So we scored every company that answered our survey on strategy, infrastructure, expertise, and governance. Governance was really the place that lagged behind a lot. So a lot of companies appeared to have a strategy. At least they were like thinking about AI and they wanted it as part of their business strategy. Yet there wasn't much focus in terms of governance, which is interesting. And if you actually look at a lot of the news headlines this last quarter, we're seeing a lot of companies pay attention to governance, like releasing statements in their earnings reports, mentioning AI governance in earnings calls. So it appears as though that gap that we identified in our first report is now being addressed, which goes to my point, right? You want to have these governance mechanisms in place so you can adopt it and you can accelerate adoption, because you don't want to start putting AI systems out there if you don't have appropriate governance and safeguards in place. So yeah, and like to directly answer your question in terms of the why. Again, I think it's things I've spoken about. Like for a lot of gaming businesses, it's a complex business. The data systems are old, or there's lots of them, and it's hard to get it all in one place to truly leverage AI. As I said before, I don't see a company really investing in the expertise and resources. Very few companies have a chief AI officer, which is now a very common position in a lot of different companies in a lot of different sectors. I think there's maybe one or two companies in the gaming industry that have a chief AI officer. A lot of the time, AI leadership is falling under maybe a CTO who also has to deal with technology, cybersecurity, and they do AI as well. So it's part of everything else they do, rather than having just a C-level executive focus on that one thing. So I think that's part of it as well. I think it's just a function of the industry. I think if you look at gaming compared to others, it's got a very long history of outsourcing the tech, and building that out. I think, you walk the G2E floor, right, every year, and there's lots of technology vendors there building the technology for the operators and things. We don't see the operators tackling that head on themselves, but maybe AI will change that. It's very easy to develop software now with coding agents. So perhaps in the next few years, we might see that dynamic change. That would be interesting, because that's been a staple for the industry for a long time, right?
I think you mentioned in the report that one of the challenges was having use cases. Other than, you said, cybersecurity or maybe the back of house.
Yeah.
What was the challenge there for having use cases in other areas, such as whether it's player development or other parts of the casino floor?
Yeah, I think I said this already. I think the main driver there is the player interaction. I don't have hard data on that, so it's an assumption I'm making based on the data we collected. But I got to think that when an AI use case touches the player, there's just a level of, not hesitancy, but there's higher scrutiny involved in terms of like making sure this has to be correct. We can't have a rogue AI do something with the customer or whatever it is. Look at the way AI is changing the user experience online. So it's similar to how the internet and mobile apps very much change the user experience, right? You have to go into a sports book and you looked at all the odds and whatever. now the internet and mobile apps, you can kind of scroll and see everything very quickly. Now with AI and chat interfaces, you're not even doing that. You're just like kind of typing, like chatting, or even, you know, using voice mode to like talk about it. That's making it a lot, the frictions may be going down. There's a lot less autonomy from the user in terms of what they're doing. You know, maybe they're asking the agent, oh, do some research on, I don't know, the Las Vegas Raiders. I want to know how they've performed away so that I can make a bet on this next game. And, you know, you're just trusting a chatbot to give you good betting advice, right? But you have no idea. So I think, you know, we don't really know yet how this new user experience is affecting the consumer. And I think that's maybe part of the hesitancy in terms of having AI use cases that touch the customer. But I don't know. Maybe just my
Kaz, for your department there, and you said there's a new report coming for 2027. For you and your team, what are you hoping? What is your ideal objective for having your department and doing this research now?
Yeah, you know, from the get-go, the idea of this report was to provide a benchmark. Benchmarks are important. They allow an industry to assess their relationship with something, in this case, AI. At this point in time, you know, we did it for 2026, so we have a benchmark for the industry's relationship with the technology. And as we're doing it on an annualized basis, we're providing this benchmark year in, year out. So the industry is going to be able to better understand their relationship with the technology. And, you know, each year we're going to provide data points that we think are important for the industry to take notice of. For example, I mentioned there's this governance gap, right? A lot of companies have an AI strategy, but it appears their governance mechanisms aren't keeping pace. We've already started to see, as I said, companies talking about AI governance more proactively and starting to put governance procedures in place, starting to have governance teams within their companies. So to me, that's great because, you know, we said there's this gap, we think it needs to be closed, and now we're seeing the industry react. Maybe it's part of our report, maybe it's also because the EU AI Act, like things are starting to come on board, right? But, you know, I think I'm not saying our report was the sole driver for this change, but like it's just, I think maybe it helps, you know, us communicating what these gaps are, where we think activity is, where we think potential opportunities are. I think it just helps the industry innovate and might help them adopt technology in a more responsible fashion and in a way that is more at a pace that's faster as well, because they'll have more intelligence and more data about it.
You know, when you guys sit back and just talk casually, and must be some times where you say, this is what the industry needs to do, you know, just kind of off the record, but what's some of that chat about? God, we only need to do X. What?
I've told this to a few people actually, because yeah, I've thought about it a lot, and you know, AI is so empowering. Like some of the stuff, like just it allows me to do with my day-to-day job is insane. I'm sure you use it now, and it's like, oh wow, this used to take me a week, it now takes me like an hour. So, and this is actually something we're looking at because it started with a casual conversation, but now it's moved, oh, we should look at this from a research perspective. But like, so, you know, I think my presumption is there's also power users of AI. And then in a lot of these companies, you know, there's like 4,000 employees or something silly, you know. There's a fraction that are really using AI well. Can you identify who those people are and exactly what is it that they're doing that makes them AI power users, and why is it making them great? Like, you know, are they actually doing their job better? I think if you can uncover that and then share it across every employee in your organization so that they themselves are leveraging AI to its full potential, then you've got adoption. You let everyone become an AI expert and, you know, everyone's a data analyst. Why not? You know, like director of housekeeping operations, give them the tools give them the learning, give them the knowledge and the education they need to use the technology themselves, and let them become an analyst, a machine learning engineer. Let them develop dashboards, and because they know their business operation the best. You just need to allow them to use AI most effectively.
You said like the director of housekeeping, and I think maybe it's true. Just having everyone engaged in at least experimenting. Whether that director of housekeeping is taking photos of all the housekeeping carts and asking GPT, how can we organize this better? What's missing?
Yeah.
Whatever that might be, but at least experimenting.
Yeah, I think that experiment's a great word, right? I think with this technology, I've talked about how you need to be careful and things can go wrong. At the same time, I think you need to create these safe sandboxed environments to allow people to experiment, because it's moving so fast. You need to experiment. You need to, try things out and see what doesn't work so you can learn about what does. I think that's so important. So I think creating this culture of experimentation, using AI to make your job better. I think at least if I was a CEO of a company, I think that's something I would just do straight away. Is like every employee needs to say how they're using AI, how it's making their job better. Maybe put it in a performance review, like how is AI, how are you using AI, how are you leveraging it to make your job better? Because then that's going to have just automatic effects, right?
Mm-hmm. What can we expect for the next report?
So, because we're doing it on an annualized basis, we certainly want to keep parts of it the same, right? So we can do year-over-year comparisons. Mm-hmm. So we did an industry survey. A lot of that, I'd say at least 80% of it will stay the same, so that we can do this kind of year-over-year comparison. There's some things we've talked about that we really want to try to include. I think we asked about and we talked about workforce impacts in the 2026 edition. I think we want to maybe double down on that a little bit, really dig into the workforce impacts a little bit more. A big commentary in our 2026 report was governance. We'll still have all of that in the report, but I think we're going to maybe try to focus on a specific theme that's really important for the gaming industry. So I think we're going to have one chapter on a very specific vertical within our industry. So maybe we'll announce that soon. The regulator survey is going to be changed somewhat. So we did a survey of over 100 regulatory staff in 2026. We put out the survey on LinkedIn and everywhere, and we asked, if you're a regulator, please fill out this survey. We're going to do it a little bit different, I think, this year. I think we're trying to go to each regulatory agency and ask them to fill out a survey on behalf of their whole agency. So very much similar to how we did the industry survey, because that was a real strength of the industry survey. We had a one response per organization design. So we went to each company and said, you need to fill out this survey, but the responses need to reflect your overall AI posture for the whole organization. So we were getting CTOs and CEOs to fill this out. We want to do something similar on the regulatory side. So reaching out to regulatory authorities, agencies, and be like, can you fill out this survey? We want to understand how your whole regulatory agency is thinking about AI. So that's a big change as well.
Good stuff. We'll look forward to it. Kaz, before we say farewell, any final thoughts to share?
I don't think so. I've been really pleased with how the initial report went. We set a really high bar for ourselves. I think, I've got such a great team here, though. Got some great PhD students, master's students here, postdocs working on the report. So I know they're going to be hard at work again with me, and I think we're going to, hopefully hit a home run again with the 2027 edition. Working again with KPMG and Vixio. So it's going to be great working with them again. We had a really strong collaboration last year. And yeah, just, if you guys want to keep up to date with everything going on at the AI Research Hub, we have a website. It's igiairhub.com. And if you want to learn about more broadly what we're doing at IGI Research, you can go over to unlv.edu/IGI, where we've got a list of all of our different research projects that we do. Yeah,
we include the links in the description to this episode. So, Kaz, thank you.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.